All right, welcome. We are so glad you've joined us here today. And one more time, I'll invite you to drop your name, role, and location in the chat and take a moment to finish the sentence. On our bookshelf, I'd love to have more stories about. Today, myself, Christine Murray, one of the early learning team members at Becker's, and my amazing colleague Rachel Woff will be facilitating this session. We'll do our guest intro here shortly. And some of you might already know Becker's well, but for those of you joining us for the first time, we just love to share that we are a longstanding partner to early learning programs, and we provide materials and furniture, supplies, educator resources. And Rachel and I work to support both our sales team and our product selection team so that they can offer programs and teachers really real, actionable, realistic things that work in classrooms and making sure we're tuned into the field and what you are all needing so we can help you do your work and support you as best we can. So we're so grateful you're here and we're honored to support you. And thanks for joining us. Today, we will have our session with Kate, and then towards the end, we'll open it up for questions. But we'll also want you to know that there's an evaluation that you can complete. And once you get to the end and hit submit, there'll be a link that pops up for a certificate. And once you fill in your name in the field on the certificate, you can either save or download it, and that will provide that PD hour. And finally, once the recording is downloaded to the cloud, we will put it up on YouTube and you can access it on our landing page. And if you've attended live or registered for this, you'll also get an email with the link to the recording as well. So you can watch it again or share it with a colleague or friends, anyone else you think that would find this interesting. And we like to take a mindfulness moment before we start our session. So today, based on our theme, I wanted to invite you guys just to take some deep breaths, and I'm going to read this snippet to you guys. This is a quote from Rudine Sims Bishop, who is a professor emerita at Ohio State University still. And she is often considered the mother of multicultural children's literature. And she created this concept of children's books being mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And this is just such a beautiful perspective. Books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a door can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of a larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. So, thanks for humoring me in my moment of appreciating her, and I think really setting the stage for why we were so excited to welcome Kate and why we so appreciate partnering with Barefoot. So, no further ado, our guest today, Kate DePalma, has been bringing children's books to life at Barefoot for over 15 years. She's also the creative development director and helps make sure all that Barefoot Books, songs, games, and other products are created so purposefully to serve children, families, caretakers, and educators. We're going to get such a great peek into the behind the scenes there today. And is the author of many titles, really focused on human diversity, global cultures, and includes Barefoot Books' Children of the World and Barefoot Books' best-selling World Celebration series. So, Kate, please feel free to take it away.
All right, let me just get this going on my side. Thank you so much for being here with me today. All right, I think I'm up and rolling. Can you guys see me? Hear me? Okay, cool. So, hi. Thank you so much for joining me in the middle of your busy day and busy week. I am Kate DePalma. I am the Creative Development Director at Barefoot Books. Um, and I have been making books at Barefoot for over 15 years now. And in my role as Creative Development Director, oversee the creation of books from the point of ideas. What kinds of books should we make? Which is why I was absolutely glued to that chat, seeing what everybody had to say about books they were looking for, all the way through to delivering the final files to the printer so that they can be printed and everything in between. We are a small, hardworking company. Um, and so there's a lot that I can tell you about how we put books together because I'm sort of involved in just about every step. And I am really enthusiastic about this topic, and my colleagues kind of can't shut me up about it. So it's really fun to have a whole chunk of 45 minutes just to run and tell you all about it. So first, I want to tell you all about Books, which has been my home for over 15 years. We have a new tagline that we debuted this year, Better Books for a Brighter World, which I think is very timely in a world that in many ways is feeling dark and scary. So our goal is to create books that are a cut above in terms of quality and care, because we believe that making better books for children has a measurable, real, tangible impact on the world and the future. And just like the work that each of you educators are doing to make a brighter world as well. So in that way, we have tons in common. I'm not going to bore you with the whole barefoot journey, but I do want to tell you, in a world where increasingly everything you buy feels like it comes from some anonymous company with Scrabble letter names, Barefoot is a real company run by a small, hardworking, committed group of people. It was formed in 1992 by two young moms. They had four children between us. We're going to have seven children between them. And since 1992, these two women have run this brilliant company. Nancy Traversy is now our CEO, and Tessa is retired. It started out in the UK, and now we are based out of Concord, Massachusetts. And we've, I think, published over 1 million books now. So we have a pretty focused set of kinds of books that we publish. In fact, I think I put up here, see, this is just sort of like a collection of some of our recent books, and you can see they have a sort of like a look and a feel to them that's pretty coherent. Um, and that's because we publish some pretty specific types of books, which is unusual. Not every publisher is sort of branded like this, but we are very focused on early learning and literacy. 0 to 6 is our sweetest spot, but we publish for 0 to 12. We do a lot of focus on social emotional learning, thinking about how to develop kids' social emotional relationships and relationship to themselves. Diversity and inclusion and global awareness and cultural identity have been at the heart of what Barefoot's been doing since the very first list. The very first list Barefoot ever published was like a myth from Tibet and a myth from ancient Greece. Like, since the very first list, what we have been about is the idea that children deserve the best stories from all around the world, and they deserve that every child deserves to see themselves in books, just like we were just talking about with mirrors and windows. In addition, the kind of world piece also deals with STEAM and sustainability. We talk a lot about not just the the human world, but also the natural world and our relationship to it, and that's something that we will actually, interestingly, come up quite a lot in this discussion of holidays. And we also do a lot of wellness type books, yoga, mindfulness, to help kids stay strong inside and out. So you see, it's a pretty like focused kind of list of books that we work on, which means that we've been able to develop a lot of expertise in certain areas. So over the 15 years that I've worked at Barefoot, you can only work on picture books for so long before you want to throw your own hat in the ring and start working on them. So these are books that I have either authored or co-authored at Barefoot in the time that I have been there. I publish under the name Kate DePalma and also under the name Sunny Scribbins for some of my younger books for kids. So I am here to talk to you today about what is probably my most successful line of books, the World of Celebrations books, Let's Celebrate, Joy to the World, and Harvest Days. But a number of my books also deal with world cultures in other ways, particularly Children of the World, which is all about human diversity. So I have to tell you that one of the first questions people ask me when I show them one of the books that I've worked on, that I've written, always ask, "Oh wow, you must be a person who came from a really interesting global background. You must have been the child of a diplomat and traveled the world. You must have a passport that is overstamped." And I wish that I could say that that was true, but actually, my interest in global cultures kind of comes from the opposite. Is from I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, in the '80s and '90s, a pretty like culturally homogenous area at that time. Nashville's a lot more diverse now, but I grew up, in the buckle of the Bible Belt and had the sense that pretty much everybody around me, lived the same way. My experience of holidays was, picking out the fiesta wear at my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. But there's two pictures here that represent some little special moments, little sparks that I had as children. One is a picture, this is not actually my picture, I will confess, but a picture from the '90s at the JCC day camp that I went to with my best friend, where I learned all about Jewish cultures and traditions, despite the fact that my family was not Jewish. And I think that was actually pretty cool and forward thinking of my parents for the '80s. But I became so fascinated with the idea that people celebrated all different celebrations, and I wanted to know all about them. And like any child of the '90s, I loved American Girl books and was really fascinated by Kirsten's Christmas Story. Her family was Swedish, I think, and she wore this St. Lucia crown with candles on it. And I remember thinking that that was just like the coolest and wildest thing, and how much I wanted to wear a crown with candles and eat the little butter cookies. Like I wanted to crawl inside the book and become her. And so I mention this because I think it's important to note, like, just these tiny little moments in a kid's life can be what later on, blooms. And for me, these little moments didn't bloom until I got older. And each of you as educators are providing these little moments, so I had this little spark of interest in world cultures, and when I finally moved away from my hometown and got out and saw the world and got to meet people from other places, those seeds that had been planted when I was young really started to flourish. And I found that I just sort of couldn't get enough of learning about all of the different ways that people around the world live. And I guess because I'm sort of a big kid, um, it's all, one of the easiest ways to think about that and talk about that is celebrations and parties. So that is sort of the perfect entry point to ask the question, how do you make books about world celebrations for kids? Like, what are your sort of starting points? And for us, we feel like you want to lean into what kids love about celebrations. Celebrations are fun, right? Like almost kind of tautological. We celebrate by doing things that are fun that we like, right? So everybody likes celebrations. So it's the perfect topic for like easy entry for a kid. In the same way that you could probably get them more interested in doing, I don't know, math problems if you incorporated balloons into the problem. Having fun and celebrations is such a great way to get people involved in world cultures. And so when we do this, we focus a lot on what kids love about celebrations. So today you can see that I decorated a little bit like we're at a party together, right? Got some candles and some treats and some decorations up, and like just the sight of it behind me, like just even seeing my own reflection gets me kind of like excited, makes me feel excited and welcomed, and like something fun is going to happen. And when your brain is in that place, that is a place where you are really, really prone to learn. So we have created this line of books for kids: Joy to the World, Let's Celebrate Special Days Around the World, and Harvest Days, Giving Thanks Around the World. I couldn't remember any one of them was around the globe, um, because it's Joy to the World. Um, and our kind of main concepts with these books are: what if we introduced kids to books around to different holidays around the world through rhyming text that will engage them and welcome them in, and really lush, beautiful illustrations. Um, this is kind of an unusual combination. Very often, what you see are more kind storybooks with this sort of approach, right? With rhyme and with beautiful, lush artwork. You're expecting to see something fiction, whereas nonfiction, you very often see photo illustrations, paragraphs of text. And we ask the question: what if you took what is so exciting and welcoming about a fiction picture book and sort of applied it to nonfiction, and used those same appeals to the senses and to fun and to story, to communicate nonfiction information. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it is that we created these books, what we learned in the process, that I think will be relevant for educators. I would not dare to come into your classroom and tell you how to do things, but I can tell you what I learned about making books that I think could be applicable for your pedagogical purposes. Because of course, making books, I am teaching kids just through the medium of the printed page rather than me in front of them. And after you listen to me talk for half an hour, you will know why I couldn't do this all day long. I'd be on the floor. I am excited to start with Let's Celebrate Special Days Around the World, and proud to say that this book continues to be, after many years, a really top seller at Barefoot. And I think it's because it answers a need. And it doesn't answer a need because I am a psychic genius. Answers for ideas for books come from everywhere. You guys just gave me 500 ideas for books at the beginning of this chat. Thank you very much. The idea for this book actually came to us from a client that we worked with, like the way that Barefoot works with Becker's. And they came to us and said, do you guys have a book about world holidays for kids, for the sort of like preschool, elementary school set? Because boy, we really need one. And if you had one of those, we would probably stack it to the ceiling and sell it. And that is, of course, music to my ears. My job is to figure out what people need and create it. So that's giving me like a, Candyland skip half the board. If I know that people need this book already, like great, fabulous, like just say less, I'll do it. So this is the moment when they came to us and said, what if there was a book about different world celebrations? And what bloomed up inside of me, but the sense memory of Kirsten and her candles on her head, and watching learning how to spin the dreidel when I was 6 years old at JCC camp. And I just thought, oh, I know exactly what I would do with that book. I know exactly how I would do that. We had other books that kind of dealt with nonfiction topics that had sort of the sense of each time you turn the page, you meet a new example of something. And so I thought, let's take that concept where we'll introduce different holidays around the world, one on each page, and try to make that feeling that I had when I was little and was imagining Kirsten St. Lucia come alive for all of these different holidays all around the world. And even like literally my sample text that I submitted to the rest of the editorial team was about St. Lucia. Like it didn't make it into the book in the end. So that was sort of our starting point, is knowing that this sort of book was needed in the world, and knowing that we had the skills and experience to do it. At that point, we had already created Children of the World, which is a book that I co-authored that is all about different world cultures that had a spread about different world celebrations. And I had just gotten done creating this Stack Global Kids that I mentioned earlier when we were having the chat, that is 50 different games, crafts, recipes, and more from around the world. And this every once in a while a project comes along that takes me to the edge of what I know and then kind of kicks me another 50 yards. And that was what Global Kids did, because I needed to learn so much about the right ways to talk about different global cultures. And what I had learned from that book is that you always have to have people who are working from lived experience check your work and make sure that you got things right. So I had gotten that far, and with that experience, I thought, okay, I can take this idea and I can turn it into a book. Um, and as we had sort of talked about the fun concept and the kid's eye view of world celebrations made it such a like a natural choice. So we knew just what we were going to do. Um, the vision for a nonfiction book with really lush illustrations was a little bit people weren't sure what to do with it because it's neither fish nor fowl, right? They're sort of like, what do you mean a nonfiction book with all of this kind of interesting, glowy illustration that doesn't, I don't totally get it. Um, but we knew that if we created something that was both beautiful and smart, that people would want to put it out, oh, I need it for my display. I'm going to put it out, I don't care what it says, but like it looks nice. And that but that we had to really really know what we were doing and really be able to back it up, because as soon as we got into world cultures, that we were going to be dealing with people's lived experience. So the vision was for something smart but beautiful that would appeal to all different kinds of people. um, so our this was our sort of the pitch. um, Oh, and one last thing that I had not mentioned, almost all of our books have this sort of educational end matter concept at the end, where we kind of go back and revisit the things in the book and give you more information. We like that because it expands the age group. Our books are so beautiful and done with so much care that they can be read with younger children, but much older children take an interest. So that educational end matter expands the age group. We knew we were going to bring that into it. But what we didn't know was how tough it was going to be and how many mistakes we were going to make. So I come from an academic background. I have a master's degree in ancient languages. And I was like, okay, well, if I ever need to learn anything, I can find everything I need in books, in reliable sources, right? Like we're people, this is what we learn and this is what we are taught. And so I thought that I was going to be able to do all of my research and then write a rough draft of the manuscript and get a rough draft of all of the illustrations and then loop in my cultural consultants. And that is where I made a mistake. And that's where I learned that the process that I now use and that we at editorial at Barefoot uses for every project that deals with different cultures, which is that we have cultural consultants from each culture working with us from the very beginning, from the time we have the idea, step by step, in creating the text and then creating the illustrations and making sure everything is right. Because we didn't get it all right in this book, right? So my starting point was, like I said, reading. I tried to read widely to learn the kind of contours of the topic. There's so many different kinds of world celebrations, right? Of course, at a basic level, there are lots of different countries and cultures. There are lots of different faiths that have all different, calendars and ways of observing and worshiping. There are different kinds of occasions. There's like agrarian agricultural holidays, and the changing of the seasons and faith occasions, and there's even festivals and occasions that are relatively new. um, so, and of course, then within them, there are so many different ways to observe a holiday, so many different kinds of, decorations and clothes and food. So, just to get the kind of like edges of the topic was a massive sort of research input process. What's interesting is as different as the variety, despite there being so much variety, what really struck me was the commonalities, that like we what we think is fun around the world, despite so many differences, is to get a bunch of people together and light some lights, get some decorations, get some good food, have fun together. And I was really touched by that. But there are also like, that sentiment is not enough to get an accurate uh, book that is really going to help children. So I needed to learn a lot about the basics of the different faiths. I need to learn a lot about different world calendars and different faith calendars and how they work and how they overlap one another. Learning that how you would be amazed how many books about world holidays talk about what month a Muslim holiday falls in. When the Muslim calendar changes each year, is a different length than the 12-month Julian calendar. And so you can't say, oh, Eid is always in June. It's not, it's moved, right? So, and you would be stunned, like published books on the market are saying this, like, in September comes Eid. And one, major thing that we learned is that there is this real attempt to kind of like force a holiday season, right? Like because there is this like dominance of Christmas, and especially in the United States, the kind of lineup of Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, the people are like, okay, well, it's the holiday season, right? And so if we talk about Hanukkah and we, try to like shoehorn some other stuff in, then we have been inclusive to everybody. But actually, the holiday season is not the holiday season for each group of people, for every faith, for every culture. For a lot of people, the holiday season is another time, a completely different time of year. So one of the things that we learned really, really early on was that actually to talk about world holidays, we could not just sort of say, wintertime, that like that would be a different book. That really we needed a book that spanned the whole year so that we could reflect the fact that the most important holidays in different cultures are at different times. So that's, I think, a really important thing for educators to keep in mind as we are going into this season, that there is this urge to kind of represent that the holiday season in December is sort of is a universal, if we talk about it as the holidays and not Christmas, but indeed it is not the holidays for everyone. That's been a really interesting change. So as I have hinted, the big thing that I learned is that I was not able to learn every single thing that I was going to need to make this book out of reliable sources from the library. That especially when it can, this is like if you only hear me say one thing today, if you're like watching napping children and you're distracted, like tune back in and hear me say this one thing, is that especially when it comes to underrepresented cultures, that found that I could not just trust what I found in sources, because when it comes to underrepresented and traditionally disenfranchised cultures, the what we think of as reliable sources have not always had a full relationship with these different cultures, and that what is published in Oxford University Press book about an indigenous culture actually might not be right, and how I hit that fact, and what the way that I solved it was with people, was with making relationships to people. So that is to me the heart of what I want to talk about today. Is what I learned is that you can't just learn about world celebrations through books. That's your jumping off point, but that the learning doesn't really start until you really talk to people about their lives, their lived experience, and their experience of celebrations, which is actually really fun, right? Call up your best friends and ask them about the ways they celebrate. It is a great topic. So let's take a look inside the book itself, for me to tell you a little bit about some of these interesting roadblocks that we hit. So the book features 13 different celebrations around the world. And some, like, is it 13 or 12? Some of them are 13 and some of them are 12. And the first spread that I want to show you guys is the one about Eid, because we knew that this book was going to have a power beyond just educating people about different celebrations. We knew that it had a power to help people move past stereotypes. And I realized that as a person who had grown up in the United States during, oh my gosh, I have just woken up my Siri. Siri, I am not talking to you at all. It's my husband's. I don't know how to interact with that thing. Okay, so um, as a person growing up, during 9/11 in the United States, 90% of the information that I got about Islam and Muslim people was Islamophobic. I didn't grow up around Muslim people. And so even though I didn't walk around with that prejudice personally, I also had not had a whole lot of new images to kind of confront and replace those ideas. So I had a great deal of fun working with my colleague, Autumn Allen, who is now my colleague, was my intern at that point, um, and talking about like, what are the things that people think about Muslims, and how can we use this spread to counteract that. So we've got Muslims taking selfies and playing with these balloons that I guess are really popular during Eid in Egypt. And we made a scene that was as like warm and friendly as possible, and are really proud with where we landed on this. Like, I think just this one image of like Muslim joy has a whole lot of power in a world where you don't see images like that very often, especially depending upon what media you consume. So and see, that's an example of that spread went right from the beginning because my colleague Autumn is Muslim and I was able to consult with her from the beginning. So I want to come clean and tell you about the places where I messed up. I think I'm sure you guys are educators. Nothing gets the attention of people than telling you about places you made mistakes. Teaching by talking about making mistakes. So Kodomo no Hi is Children's Day in Japan. This is not like an ancient or obscure holiday in any way. I have the koinobori back here. When I was living in California, I was very excited to see them hanging sometimes. So this is a like relatively new holiday, and a celebration of children. I think it was originally Sun's Day, and has been sort of changed to represent daughters as well. And this book, or this holiday, as you can imagine, is represented in a number of books that talk about holidays for children. Of course, a kid wants to know about Children's Day. I can remember when I was a kid, my Mother's Day and Father's Day, I'd be like, when is it Daughter's Day? And my parents would be like, every day, move on. So I really loved the idea of like, no, there actually is a Children's Day, and you hang up these different flags to indicate, the different family members. When I first started researching this, every image that I could find of this holiday involved little boys dressed up as samurais and jousting with samurai swords. And I guess part of this is because it used to be Sun's Day. And so my original sketch for this book had that whole scene of the little boy, and you can see he is wearing the little kind of like paper folded up samurai hat in this illustration. And we showed the rough illustration to my Japanese consultant, and she was like, that is just such a sort of like outdated version of that. Like it would be the kind of the equivalent of if you said, here's a picture of Christmas in the United States, and it was like people in a one horse open sleigh, roasting chestnuts over an open fire. Like an image people would be familiar with, but not like, oh yeah, that's what my family does this. So we realized, okay, actually a lot of representations of different global celebrations that we could find were dated, and that we needed to talk to people who, not someone who lived in the country 50 years ago but immigrated and is remembering how they celebrated as children. We needed to talk to people who were like living in the country right now celebrating the thing and asking, okay, what would you see, what do you think about? And it was from those conversations that we learned, okay, there are these specific snacks, rice balls wrapped up with oak leaves, and and the biggest thing is these flags, the koinobori, that you would fly outside to indicate the different members of your family. So we changed it all around. We put that kind of prominent in the illustration and also in the text. The fish flags we hang represent family: my mother, my father, my mother, my brother, and me.
Kate, is there a reason that the largest flag is different from the rest of the fish flag?
Yes, that flag has, and now you guys see this is, it's been like 6 years since I wrote this book, so I don't have all of the facts candidly to memory, but it has a special, the one at the front has a special meaning. At the top, vibrant streamers fly, sometimes a family crest.
Oh, cool.
And so I think the black one is for the dad, the red one is
Hmm.
for the mom. So first lesson learned. Okay, sometimes what's in books is outdated, not wrong necessarily, but just out of date. So here's where I really have to tell on myself is this spread Matariki. So Matariki is a Maori holiday. And Matariki is the name of the holiday. It's the name of this constellation with 9 stars in the sky. Um, it is that same constellation in Western culture is called the Seven Sisters. Um, and it is a new, I think it's considered a New Year celebration, but it's once a year when this constellation rises in the sky. And I did quite a bit of research on this, and every image that I could find from of Matariki showed people in traditional like Maori dress dancing and like spinning fire on the beach. Okay, cool, like great. That's the, and I found these illustrations. I sent them through to my illustrator photos, sent them through to my illustrator, was like, this is, these are the images that I'm able to find of what this celebration looks like. And I found a Maori um, consultant and sent the spread to them, and they wrote me back and said, this is so wrong, I don't even like I can't even help you, like go get a clue by. And I mean, which is of course like your absolute nightmare when we hire sensitivity readers and cultural consultants for virtually every book. And that's sort of like that's your most exaggerated nightmare of what's going to happen, is that someone is going to write you back and be like, this is so wrong that that no one can help you, goodbye, but forget my name. And I think that as a like the PS of the email said, like, here's a lecture where you can like learn about this holiday. So I immediately, cleared my calendar to sit down and watch this 2-hour lecture from a Maori elder about what Matariki really is, and learned what it really is, and learned that this constellation that we call the Western cultures call the Seven Sisters, is in Maori culture has 9 stars, and that it is incredibly important, and that this is a holiday that celebrates and observes the transition of departed loved ones onto like guiding people who have died onto the afterlife. And so these constellations come up in the sky, this like this special morning. And so the way that is celebrated is by this sort of dawn observation of the constellations rising in the sky, and a feast is prepared in an earth oven, um, completely different, right, than everything I had found. Everything I had found was modern events put on probably by well-meaning people who were like, oh, it's Maori holiday, and then we'll celebrate it, we'll like do some Maori stuff, right, we'll like have them like dancing on the beach, right. And this is like, it was not just like in one source but multiple sources. These are the images that I'm finding. Okay, these are Maori people, modern Maori people celebrating Matariki. Completely wrong. And my original text talked about 7 stars in the sky, and that was because this constellation is coming from a Western perspective. This constellation has 9 stars in the Maori world. So the silver lining to this is that I reached out to the professor who had given the 2-hour lecture that the first consultant sent to me, and explained the situation, and was like, I really messed this up the first time, and I really want to get this right. And would you be willing to come on and help me make sure that I have it right? I was able to, and I mean, completely legitimate that the first person would have seen what I delivered to her and was like, yeah, no, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, I'm not interested. But it was really kind of the second person to be like, yeah, I'll help you. I'm willing to sign on and be a cultural consultant. And so like it was a moment of like absolute, cold water in the face, but the learning experience that came out of that, of like, okay, now I can no longer think that my own methods of research and understanding this are adequate. Like, they're not. It is time for, especially when you are looking at indigenous cultures, traditionally underrepresented cultures, you can't just sort of trust what you see in what you think of as a reputable source. It didn't really come alive until I really started talking to people, um, which was like a really cool and wonderful gift because it means for each book I get to meet like a dozen people and talk to them about their holidays and learn about what is special to them. And each time I look at each one of these spreads, I think about all of the conversations that we had and all of the wonderful friends that I made. So I will say one last thing on Let's Celebrate, which is, you can see my decorations here from the book. I have the plastic papel picado, God help me. And I've got some coin of I have some diwa from Diwali. Um, and one tip that I have come up with over many years of doing author events related to this book is that, as soon as you start talking about celebrations, you want to participate, right? Like, no one wants to just like hear about a party that's happening in the next room. You want to go, right? So, to the point, that is appropriate. Having a little bit of a participatory element, having things that kids can pick up and look at. I've got a shell that's like the patuto that they blow at Inti Raimi, and just having something physical to look at and think about and consider, I think is also, it has this way of making the book kind of like leap to life. Now, of course, not every, this is my book, so I have my little like classroom kit. So I want to have my Dead Moroz and Snegirochka, and not everyone is going to have all of these little goodies. But I think it is a really nice way of reminding kids that these things are really real, and that this is not just sort of like, okay, like you've read a fantasy novel about all of these interesting things, but like really real people are really doing these things. We mentioned calendars, and how calendars are really tricky. So we had to have a calendar at the end that talks about when all of these different holidays fall. And we also needed to have a little note that explained why they're not always the same, why some have a specific date and sometimes they might span. So think people think making children's books would be an easy job, and then sometimes you have to, in 50 words, explain the concept of lunar versus solar calendars for an elementary school age. Go. It's a lot. So thinking about bringing this to how you as educators can use this, and how you can use the story of the creation of this book to think about how you choose books for that talk about different world celebrations. I would say that one of the biggest things to look at and think about is, who is the author? How did they create the book? And what should be up here as well, in addition to the author's note, is the acknowledgments. The slide fell out, but in this book, I have an author's note that talks about, the way that acknowledges that this book is only a small picture, that there is a huge world beyond the book, and that you might celebrate these holidays differently. You might live in that country but not celebrate that holiday. And our great big right at the beginning acknowledgments of all of the people that helped. And so I like looking for books about different world holidays, people working from lived experience and talking about their methods, and talking about the people who were involved, I would say is a really important thing. So I have no, I'm often jibber jabber land. I'm not sure how much longer I have. I will.
Hey, we have
Yep.
about 15 minutes till we'll want to like release people if they'd like to leave. So maybe if
Oh,
we have about 10 minutes more for you to have the floor, and then say 5 minutes,
perfect.
and then anybody that needs to leave at 2 can, and but we can also stay on for some Q&A.
Excellent. Well, I'm just going to very briefly touch on Joy to the World because I think a book about Christmas has sort of some people are going to need or use this, others aren't because it's focused on one faith and one holiday. And I will say that I went into working on this book with the false confidence of like, oh, well, that's so much easier, right? We're not dealing with all of these different faiths and all of these different calendars. It's one single celebration, and we'll look at how it's celebrated around the world. I already know that I need my world consultants. Like, this is going to be a total cinch. Um, and it was, of course, not. But that's the story of every single book. The idea came from the like huge response to Let's Celebrate. It was clear that there was a great big demand for people talking about and thinking about different ways that people celebrate. And the sort of immediate demand we had was for What About Christmas Around the World. What was different about it? The scope was much smaller, but what I was not expecting about it was the way that it does delve so deeply into one faith. I grew up in a Christian household. I went to a Catholic university, and my education happens to be that I have a master's degree in ancient Greek, which just happens to be what the Gospels are written in. So this would, you would normally think, okay, you would really need like a specialist to write a book like this. And actually, I found that I did have the correct life experience to do this. So the thing that was more tricky about this was needing to deal with all of the faith elements. So I worked with a PhD in theology. I read the Gospels in Greek, and I also worked with an evangelical pastor who I went to high school with because I'm from Tennessee, and I wanted to make sure that the book was going to, what I said was, pass the evangelical sniff test. I grew up in a very evangelical area, and it was really important to me that I was going to create something that no one was going to pick up and be like, well, that doesn't work for me. That's not like that does not hit my standards as someone who is really, really serious about my faith. And so my pal, Father Parker, helped me take out the word magical, for example. Said evangelicals are not going to love the word magical. So it was really interesting having those conversations between a Harvard educated theologian and my like Pentecostal pastor friend, and finding something that was gonna toe all of those lines. But I'm really proud that in the end it shows a really broad picture of what Christianity can look like. My favorite spread is Ethiopia. I love their beautiful white outfits. And I learned that Ethiopia was like one of the first nations on earth to embrace Christianity. So these are things that would have fascinated me as a kid. All right. So I'm going to really quickly tell you about Harvest Days, which is illustrated also by Martina Peluso, who did Let's Celebrate. The first two books had a great big response, and we knew that with the next book that we did in the series needed to be more broad again, not do a kind of single holiday. And we had a lot of requests for a sort of Thanksgiving type book. So we said, okay, we need to look at harvest traditions. And I'm going to tell you guys, like, at first I was like, blah. Like, I'm kind of a big kid, and like, I don't know, I like holidays where there's, balloons and ice cream and whatever. And I was just like, oh, pumpkins, turkey, like whatever. This is the most boring possible holiday. And I was stunned that actually creating this book just like grew a whole new lobe of my brain, because it turns out that talking about where our food comes, or talking about harvest, is talking about where our food comes from, and is talking about our relationship to the earth and to the different seasons. And that is something that is so profound and fundamental. It goes back further than organized religion. It goes back further than most of the other cultural stuff. Like, people celebrating that there was enough food in the autumn to live through the winter is something completely fundamental. Another thing that I did not expect that we would get into with this book is labor. So I'll click over and show you guys. Now we're inside this book. We decided to do crop over in Barbados. We wanted to show the African diaspora, and we've all had done there's another really cool African holiday in here. And when we started working on crop over, we were surprised and kind of like humbled, breathtaking that this is a holiday for the harvest that doesn't center food because it was this celebration of the enslaved people in Barbados. It was when the work of the harvest was done. And we realized that this book asks these really basic, kind of huge, confronting questions of like, where does the food come from? Who picks the food? Are those the same people who get to eat the food? And like how much did a book that I thought, 5 minutes ago was like, oh, pumpkins and turkey actually is asking these huge confronting questions. So we took a great deal of care with this spread to make sure that this representation was accurate and joyful, and that we talked about, addressed the underlying cause of the celebration. So the text says crop over was born from the relief the enslaved people felt at the end of the brutal harvest season, and like really carefully choosing those words to not shy away from it. So it was sort of I was not expecting that this book would take me to such a sort of confronting and interesting place. Also on that same list, thinking about where we wanted to set our Jewish holiday. So we knew we wanted to do Sukkot, which is this really neat holiday where you spend time outside in the sukkah, as a harvest tradition. And my Jewish colleague Lisa was like, hey, let's not just like immediately assume that it needs to be Israel, because Jewish people live in diaspora all over the world. And it's really important that we represent the idea that Jews live as minorities all over the world. So let's pick a place that has like a really small Jewish population and represent Sukkot taking place there, because that is a very real thing for Jewish people all over the world. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. Interestingly, we got a whole bunch of pushback on this, and people thinking that
Mm.
this was sort of like intentional erasure of Israel, or like meaning to be like a political statement, where it was like, no, this was an intentional bid to represent, Judaism in diaspora. But a really important point: you can do everything with like the purest intent, and still find that people are offended, and pure intent does not protect the outcome of what you created. I know that we got to be getting close, but I do want to mention from the very beginning we were really hoping that this book would include a Native American harvest tradition, right? So it's like, let's do a Thanksgiving type book. We didn't do Thanksgiving, we set Thanksgiving Day in Liberia. um, that's a whole, I wish I had 5 more minutes to talk about that. But we all along were like, okay, we're going to have a Native American, North American harvest tradition, sort of to kind of stand in opposition to the idea of Thanksgiving Day. And I spent 6 months talking to absolutely everybody that I could find, about what would be the right way to do that. And in the end, at the end of 6 months, and I mean, I am not like a person who takes no for an answer, I had to conclude that for some cultures and some peoples, the idea of being featured in a sort of like a roundup of different cultures about different traditions is not sort of like an appealing opportunity. And that especially for Indigenous people in North America, like we're talking about culture that has been absolutely uh, decimated, and that there's not a trust between somebody, an Indigenous person, and me coming from a publisher that is run by settlers. And so understanding that, like, okay, for a lot of people reaching out and saying, hey, would you like to talk to me about Sukkot in Morocco and help me get this right? People are like, that's so cool. I would love to see that in a book. But that actually is not universal. And you may find the same thing with, if my edict to you is talk to your community, your parents, your other teachers to learn about different holidays, that some people are going to be kind of like, thanks but no thanks, and that's okay. We came back around and said, okay, if that doesn't interest you, let's talk about what kind of books we can make that will serve your community. And we in the end decided that this was not the right place for that. So interesting how what is a book for ages 3 to 7 actually contains so many very interesting, heavy, difficult discussions and decisions. Um, and doing these kinds of books means being ready to get things wrong and being ready to be uncomfortable. So just to really quickly recap what I think are the kind of like top level takeaways of what I have learned from this process of creating these books. Kids love celebrations because they are fun. It's a great kind of like low, great low barrier to entry way of talking about world cultures. Anybody doing this needs to really start by learning the basics and make sure that they understand basic things like a Muslim holiday is not in the same month every year. You know, you don't want to go into this and mess things up. We in famous at Barefoot, the our committee for learning more about world cultures internally at the home office team decided that we needed to have an info session about Ramadan because we have several Muslim colleagues and we wanted to make sure people understood and were sensitive about it. And what did we do? We scheduled it as a Ramadan lunch and learn. Ramadan is not a great time to invite people to come to sit together to eat lunch, right? Yes. So you're gonna like walk face into this stuff if you don't know, you gotta learn the basics. And even when you do, you're still gonna walk into it sometimes. Looking at things from a child's eye view, what do kids like? The bright colors, the lights, the balloons, the food, thing grown-ups do, honestly. One important thing that I haven't said that I want to make sure I hit on is not assuming that your audience is or isn't anything. We specifically wrote these books to assume that, read them to assume the kid is familiar with the holiday and celebrates it, or the kid has never read it before, has never heard of the holiday, and that it reads the same way, so that you're not sort of like, okay, Christmas, everyone knows what that is. Let me tell you about it. And then say, okay, Eid, a strange, exotic holiday. Let me help you walk you through it. We put pronunciations on everything. We don't assume that anybody knows or doesn't know about anything. We think people teach about celebrations better than just learning from books. But not everybody is going to be thrilled for an opportunity to talk about and share about their holidays. Faith is sensitive, culture is sensitive. You could have the best intentions and still upset people. Part of doing this kind of work is being prepared to get things wrong and to learn and to feel uncomfortable. What we tell ourselves at Barefoot is better a diamond with a crack than a pebble without. I'm just about to put a book on press and I've been chanting that all week. I might not get it all right, but I'm doing something important. Don't let it stop me. When it comes to selecting and sharing books about global celebrations, I think it's really important to appeal to senses, rich text, rich artwork. Like I said, you don't want to read about a party happening in the next room. You want to be there. You want to be part of it. Appeal to sense of fun, sense of participation. Look for books with that kid's eye view. Ask about who the author is, how they made the book, where they got their information. One really important thing is looking at different types of books. I think these books are a really great jumping off point, but Global Kids is, is a deck of activities that allows you to participate in some of these things. Children of the World is another book that I co-authored that talks about different all about different human diversity. We have the Our World series that talks about different countries around the world. We have a brilliant series of picture books that talk about children celebrating different holidays. Like, I would hope that no one would ever think that this was curriculum on its own, right? Like, this is a great, you want this and you want the printable activities and you want the other books that go with it and the stories. You guys know this, right?
The starting
my
off point. Yeah.
Yep. And my
Kate, do
last
you mind?
oh yeah, yep. Sorry.
Can we just pull up our QR code for our evaluation while you keep chatting? Would that be okay?
Oh, this is my last 20
Okay,
seconds. So
wonderful.
just to say, we're in a time when people are really actively trying to suppress books like this and keep them out of children's hands. And there's a reason. It's because books like this are powerful. Talking about the ways that people live builds empathy, and you are much less likely to want to do someone wrong, harm them, if you have empathy for them, if you can understand them. So keep doing the work you're doing of sharing these kinds of books with children. It is powerful, it's meaningful, it changes the world. Thank you very much for your time, and I will cede the floor to my Becker's friends.
Thank you. I'm glad we waited that one out. It's important.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kate. That was absolutely amazing. So now we're going to allow for questions, but we're kind of going to multitask. So go ahead, and if you have any questions, you can drop it into the chat for Kate to answer. And then also, if you want to scan your QR code here, we'll also share the link to that in the chat for your evaluation. Like Christine said at the beginning, you can go ahead and complete that evaluation, and then you will have the certificate pop up at the end that you can populate with your name and print out or save as you need.